forget to like, subscribe, and comment.
All right, so you've given us a whole bunch of research about website color, right? And we're supposed to focus on accessibility, especially for users with color blindness and dyslexia.
Yeah, so it's about more than just making things look pretty. We really want to dig into how color impacts things like readability and user experience, and how to make sure everyone feels welcome on your website.
I'm already way more interested in this than I thought it'd be. Like, I never really considered designing for people who see color differently than me. It's kind of blowing my mind. So where do we even start with all this?
Well, a good place to start might be color harmony, right? Remember that color wheel thing from way back in art class?
Okay, yeah, I vaguely remember that.
So we're talking about complementary colors, analogous colors, all that good stuff. They're actually really important for good web design.
Okay, refresh my memory. Why are those color schemes so important?
Well, they can create really different visual effects, right? Like complementary colors, those are the ones opposite each other on the color wheel, like blue and orange, for example.
Yeah.
They make for a really high contrast, vibrant look, high energy. And then you have analogous colors. They sit next to each other on the wheel, so think like blue and blue-green. Those create a much more harmonious, calming feel.
So, like, if I was designing a website for a meditation app or something, I probably wouldn't want to use those super high contrast colors, right?
You got it. You'd want to lean towards those calmer, analogous colors. But it's not just about the way it looks either. Like, the research actually shows that your color choices can impact a website's readability, too.
Really? How does that work?
Okay, so there's this one study that looked at how background color affects reading speed and comprehension, especially for people with dyslexia. And it turns out that warm background colors, so think like peach, orange, yellow, those can actually make things easier to read for both people with and without dyslexia.
Wait, hold on. Are you saying that a classic white background, like, that's not actually the best for readability?
It seems crazy, right? But yeah, the research showed that those warm backgrounds led to people reading faster and with less eye strain. And they even broke it down by specific color combinations. We can get into that a bit more later. But this isn't just an interesting fact. It could be a game changer for web design.
You're blowing my mind here. And we haven't even gotten to the really technical stuff.
I know, right?
Okay, so you know how sometimes you see those strings of letters and numbers? I think they're called HEX codes.
Yeah.
They dictate the exact shade of color on a website. What's the deal with those?
So those HEX codes, you can think of them like a unique fingerprint for a color, right? It tells the computer precisely how much red, green, and blue light to mix together to create that specific shade.
Okay, so it's not just like blue, it's the exact shade of blue I want.
You got it. And the really great thing about them is those HEX codes, they guarantee that the color you choose will look the same on any device, any browser, anything.
See, that's a huge relief because I've definitely had that experience where like a color looks different on my phone than it does on my computer.
Wow.
Why does that happen anyway?
Well, it's because different devices, they have their own way of displaying color, right? But there's this system, it's called ICC, which stands for International Color Consortium, and it helps standardize color management across all the different devices. So it's like a universal translator for color. So no matter where your website is being viewed, the color will be consistent.
That is incredible. It's like color theory meets like super advanced technology, which I guess is kind of what web design is when you think about it.
Totally.
But, speaking of making websites visually appealing, we need to think about how to make them accessible to everyone. Right?
Absolutely.
And that's where understanding things like color blindness and other visual impairments come in. We need to make sure that the colors we choose aren't accidentally making it hard for some people to use the website. Okay, so I'm ready to dive into that. I know it's important, but I'll admit, I don't really know where to start when it comes to designing for color blindness.
Well, the important thing to remember is that not everyone perceives color in the same way. And there are actually different types of color blindness, and each type affects how people see colors differently.
So how do we design for something that we can't fully see ourselves? It feels like trying to navigate in the dark.
That's where those accessibility guidelines you mentioned come in. They actually give really specific recommendations about something called color contrast, and that's basically the difference in lightness or darkness between two colors.
Right. I heard of contrast, but how do you actually measure that? Is it just a matter of like one color looking lighter or darker than another, or is there something more to it?
There's actually a specific formula for it. It's called the contrast ratio, and it's all laid out in the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines.
WCAG, right. I've heard that. It's all about making websites more accessible. Okay, but why is contrast so important?
Because if the contrast between, say, your text color and your background color is too low, it can be really difficult for someone with low vision or color blindness to read the text. It's like trying to read faded ink on a page.
Okay, that makes total sense. So high contrast is good for readability, but how high does the contrast need to be?
Well, the WCAG, it actually gives us targets. So, for example, they recommend a minimum contrast ratio of 4.5.1 for normal text and 3.1 for large text.
Okay, so those ratios are like the magic numbers for accessibility. But how do we make sure our designs hit those ratios? Seems kind of complicated.
It's actually not as bad as you think. There are a ton of free online contrast checkers. You can just plug in the colors you're thinking of using, and the tool will tell you the contrast ratio.
Wow, technology is amazing. So instead of just randomly picking colors, I can actually check if they're accessible.
Yeah, exactly. And there are even more tools out there that can help you build color palettes or even simulate what it looks like to have different types of color blindness. There's a lot to explore.
I'm ready to explore them. But I think this is a good spot to pause for a second and let our listeners digest all this information. We'll be back in a jiff. And we're back. Okay, so we've covered a lot, but I'm excited to learn more about those tools you mentioned.
Oh, yeah.
Especially the ones that can simulate color blindness.
Right.
It feels important to actually see how our color choices might affect someone, you know?
You're telling me it's one thing to get the theory, but being able to actually see those simulations, that can be a real eye-opener.
For sure.
No pun intended. There are some great websites and browser extensions that can do this.
Oh, cool.
You just upload like an image of your website design, and the simulator shows you what it would look like to someone with different types of color blindness.
Whoa, really? So like, if I'm using red and green for buttons, which I think I've heard can be an issue.
Yeah.
I can actually see how that might be confusing for someone with red-green color blindness.
Exactly. You're literally seeing it through their eyes. It's pretty wild.
That's really cool. And that's where those contrast checkers come in, right?
Yep.
I can use those to find color combinations that work for everyone.
Exactly. Think of them as like your color accessibility sidekicks.
I love it.
And you know what? There are even more tools out there that can help you kind of streamline your whole color workflow. Like, remember those HEX codes?
Yeah, the unique fingerprints.
Right. So there are these things called HEX code generators.
Okay.
So let's say you have a specific color in mind. Maybe it's from your brand logo or even a photo or something. You can use this tool, kind of like an eyedropper tool, to grab that color, and the HEX code generator spits out the code you need to use it on your website.
So no more eyeballing it and crossing my fingers.
Exactly.
That is a game changer. Okay, but what about when you're starting from scratch? Like, what if I don't have specific colors in mind yet?
Well, my friend, have I got a tool for you? Get ready for the color palette generator.
Oh, tell me more.
There are a ton of these online, and they basically use those color harmony principles we talked about before. So you pick one color you like, any color, and the generator will give you a whole bunch of options for complementary, analogous, triadic, all those color schemes based on that one color you chose.
So it's like, I have a color consultant.
Right.
But free.
Exactly. And a lot of these generators are really cool because you can actually fine-tune the results. So you can decide how many colors you want in the palette, play around with different shades and saturations, even set your desired contrast levels.
Wow, that's amazing.
Yeah, it's really something.
So there's way more to picking colors than I thought.
Oh, for sure. It's not just about what looks good, you know?
Right.
It's about what's going to work for everyone, making it accessible and creating a good user experience.
Okay. That makes sense. Now, we've talked a lot about color blindness, but you also mentioned other visual impairments earlier.
Yeah.
What are some things we should be aware of for those users?
That's a great question. So for people with low vision, for example, font size and weight, those are huge.
Oh, yeah. Okay.
Like you can have great contrast, but if the text is too small, it's still going to be tough to read, you know?
So bigger is better when it comes to font size.
Pretty much. And don't be afraid to go for bolder font weights too. Just make that content super easy to see.
Okay. Got it. Anything else that can make a big difference for accessibility?
Oh, yeah, totally. One thing people don't always think about is white space.
White space. Oh, right, like negative space.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's not about the color white, obviously.
Right.
It's all about the empty space around the elements on your page.
So giving your design room to breathe.
Yeah. That's a great way to put it. Because honestly, that can be huge for people with visual impairments or even like cognitive differences.
Yeah.
It reduces visual clutter and just makes it easier to follow the flow of information.
Oh my gosh, yes. I've definitely been on websites that are just overwhelming, you know?
It's like sensory overload.
Yes, exactly.
Whereas white space, it brings in that sense of calm and order and makes things feel much more manageable.
It's not just about the colors, it's about how it all comes together.
That's what it is. And the cool thing is, when you really focus on accessibility, a lot of times you end up with a stronger design anyway, you know?
Excellent point.
It makes you think about every little detail and how it all works for the user.
That's so true. Okay, so we've got color contrast, font size, white space. Anything else we need to remember?
One more big one, alt text for images.
Right.
We want to make sure that people who are visually impaired and using screen readers can still experience those images, you know?
That makes sense.
It's about providing those descriptions so they still get the full picture.
So we're making sure those images have descriptions so screen readers can pick them up.
Exactly. It's like we're still painting the full picture, you know, even if someone can't actually see the image.
I love that. Okay, so we've talked about a ton in this deep dive.
We really have.
Everything from like basic color theory to all these tools and accessibility stuff. If our listeners only remember one thing from all of this, what would you want it to be?
Oh, man, that's a tough one. I think the biggest takeaway is that website color, it's about way more than just making things look pretty. It's a really powerful tool. It can change the whole user experience, good or bad, you know, and it can make or break your website's accessibility. It can even affect how successful your website is overall.
That's so true. It's about finding that balance between making it beautiful, but also making sure it works for everyone.
Yeah. We want everyone to feel welcome and included.
Exactly. And like you were saying, there's always something new to learn. New trends, new technology.
It's always evolving.
That's what makes it exciting. So as you're working on your next web design project, remember, don't just slap any old colors on there. Think about it. Be intentional, get creative, and make that commitment to accessibility.
I love it.
Because the right color palette, that can be the difference between a good website and a truly exceptional website.
Absolutely. And hey, you might even discover your new favorite color along the way. Who knows?
Now that is a colorful thought to end on.